Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us with our webinar today that we're having with leaders in Washington teacher education programs. We are demystifying accountability in Washington teacher preparation programs. We have some myths to bust, to debunk today. I'm Dr. Erica Hernandez Scott. I am the Professional Educator Standards Board's Executive Director. And before I took on this role for 12 years, I was a teacher educator in 3 different states, including the state of Washington. And so I have had the privilege to really take time and deeply understand teacher education. And today I'm really excited for you to hear from Washington programs about what they are doing to really elevate this profession and to serve educators, students, and families in our state. So we have just a few slides that I'm going to go through to provide some introduction, and then I'm going to hand it off to our program leaders who will introduce themselves. And then they're going to tell you their stories. You often don't get to hear from them. You might hear about them in the news, in newsletters, in PESB Gov deliveries, but it is rare that you have an opportunity for them to come together as a collective and be able to tell the story of how they're being held accountable in the state of Washington and how that is different and benefits Washingtonians. So today, the major myth that we want to debunk is that teacher preparation is failing and is therefore not needed in the education system. Like medicine and law, teacher preparation is critical to what it means to be a professional. We would never want to to go to a hospital and have the surgery from someone who was not prepared. We would never want to have a lawyer working to save our future who had not been to law school or perhaps passed the bar. And while I know there are exceptions to all things, teacher preparation is a profession. Education is a profession like law and medicine and should be treated as such. And in many ways, Washington State is very ahead of the curve in doing that. And our programs are going to have an opportunity to tell you about that today. But to give you just a teeny little bit of background knowledge, I wanted to show you a little bit about the DNA of teacher education. One of the things that people often misunderstand is that teaching and teacher education are very different things. In teacher education, you have to have disciplinary expertise. If you're a math teacher, you got to know your math. If you're a science teacher, you got to know your science. If you're literacy, you got to know your literacy. That's the content, that's the disciplinary expertise. Teacher education is its own discipline. How do I help someone else learn how to do something? I have to know the content that they're trying to learn, and I have to have a whole set of skills to help them figure out how to build that competency. So you need disciplinary expertise, you need teacher education expertise, and you have to know the very specific competencies that candidates are supposed to leave a program with. And when candidates leave programs, even a very, very strong candidate is still a novice. So, do we know what a highly effective novice should know and be able to do at the end of a program? Those are things that our teacher preparation programs grapple with every day. It's part of their program design, it's part of their performance assessments. And all of this doesn't sit in a bucket by itself. It's rooted in the knowledge of students, families, and communities. That's why our preparation programs have district partners. And it's situated in a social, political, cultural, and economic context. And that's critically important right now as we're hearing in the media lots of attacks on higher education. um, Degree attainment is critical for um, teacher preparation. You cannot become a teacher without having a degree in the state of Washington. So, um, University-based education, higher education is critical to this profession. Medicine isn't taking their profession out of medical schools, and law isn't taking its profession out of law schools. So we really need to think about what's happening as moves across the nation are pushing education to deprofessionalize what it does in order to get things done faster and cheaper. And faster and cheaper, unfortunately, is faster and cheaper, and we don't want to regret the ultimate outcomes in the end. Teacher education is complex. It's its own thing, and it's really beautiful when you understand it. This is where PESB sits in the education system. We actually answer to and collaborate with many, many people. We sit in the executive branch, which means we primarily take direction from the governor's office, but we also take direction from the legislature who writes RCWs. We take direction from other education agencies who reveal problems and make requests. And then we also hear directly from students, families, and communities. The law is made, then the board makes rules. And as a result, we make policies that are used for OSPI certification. So certification policy comes from us. Anything about professional practice and professional conduct is policy made by PESB, as well as what is needed for educator growth and development, like clock hours, CTE policy. We regulate preparation programs, but in the last few years, we've added another description. We regulate and support preparation programs. We have high expectations and we want to offer high levels of support in order to meet those so that Washington can be head and shoulders above the rest of the nation. And then we also facilitate and provide technical assistance for a number of other things. So if you look at this graphic, you can see that while teacher preparation is regulated by PESB, it actually should have several touch points with other parts of the system. And what I hope to do today is to allow those other parts of the system to hear the stories of the programs and how they might come together and work in meaningful ways. Because we are the Professional Educator Standards Board, I thought it would be really important for you all to understand just how many standards our preparation programs are responsible for. They have program standards that defines what the program does and how they do it. They have role standards. So if you've heard of InTask, those are the standards that teachers are supposed to have knowledge and skills for. They also have to understand the specific subject matter, skills, endorsement areas. So what does it need? What does one need to be a SPED teacher? What does one need to teach dual language? What does one need to teach health and fitness? All of those are endorsement competencies. And then we have the CCDEI standards, the cultural competency, diversity, equity, inclusion standards. Those define what programs do and the knowledge and skills of the candidates. So both the program and the teachers that come out of them must be able to address those standards as well. So our preparation programs have a very heavy lift. And all of these sets of standards are nested one inside the other. So you need experts who understand program design. You need experts who understand the difference between a teacher and a K-12 teacher, a CTE teacher, a principal, a school psychologist. Exactly what is a school psychologist supposed to know and be able to do? And how do they do that with an equity mindset in the state of Washington that is very, very diverse? Lots of accountability for preparation programs. And then lastly, my last point is that teacher education preparation in and of itself is a very dynamic space. So preparation programs have at most 2 years where they bring in prospective educators and they prepare them to be teachers. Before that, they have been learning about education from their 13 years of compulsory schooling from K to 12. If they've had time in the workforce, Everything that the person has experienced before entering a teacher preparation program influences what kind of teacher they are. And then after they leave their program, they are further developed and influenced by the environment and the people that they're surrounded by. So preparation is actually a collective endeavor in which there is a moment in time where the sole responsibility belongs to preparation programs, but there's responsibility before and responsibility after. And we really want to think about who's missing from this dynamic space and how might we work together. PESB does things, the preparation programs do certain things. Our state associations like WACD, the principal prep, AWSP, WASA, all of our alphabet soup, all of those people have a stake in what it looks like to prepare educators. And districts have a heavy responsibility of ensuring that learning continues to take place and that the environment in which our educators are employed are healthy and supportive, where they're able to act on the things they learned. And then the legislature, we hope, supports and resources this collective endeavor to ensure that our educators, students, and families, all of them, get what they need across the various geography and cultural contexts that we have in the state of Washington. So, seems like a small thing. Sometimes people think preparation is such a small thing we can do without it. Actually, no. It's the fulcrum of the system that takes what comes before and helps prepare for what comes after. And we want to share those stories today. And for those all of you who are here who are listening, to think about, well, how could you join in the work with these programs? I've spent the last 4 years working alongside them, debunking myths about higher education being unwilling to change or being late to the game, not being ready for the future. And I found that those things were just not true. And instead of me telling you about those experiences, what I really want to do is have them tell you in their own words. So we have 6 questions that we're going to talk about today, and our program leaders will introduce themselves and give you their stories. The first one is, what does traditional teacher preparation program accountability look like? To what extent does it work? Washington has created its own way of holding programs accountable, and that's very different than what happens in other states. So I'm going to take that first question. I'm going to stop sharing and see which of our program leaders would like to respond to that question and to each other. And then after we finish with that question, I will bring us back to this slide so we can see what the next one is. So, what does traditional teacher preparation accountability look like, and to what extent does it work? And if you've worked in teacher prep in other states, then you probably know there's a big difference between what Washington is doing and what's happening elsewhere around the nation. So here I'm going to stop, ask my colleagues here to feel free to raise your hand if you'd like, but you can speak freely because this is a conversation. We have an audience watching us, but this is a conversation among friends and people who have shared mission, and we're ready to hear from you.
Okay, I'll go. I'll be the first to bite. Hi everyone. My name is Wayne Au. I am a dean and professor in the School of Educational Studies at the University of Washington, Bothell. And this question is speaking to like, what does this sort of typically look like, right, Erica? My just like sort of the stock. Obviously we know it varies a lot, state to state, institution to institution. In a lot of states, there are like sort of essentially a high stakes educational exam attached to getting your certification or credential. There's tests like the Praxis test and some others that get used to essentially either guard entrance into programs and or used to sort of measure what's perceived to be successful completion of those programs as well, and earn your credential. The NTPA is still floating around in a few states as well. And so that, like, we don't have that here anymore, and thank goodness, from my perspective. But that one, of course, is better than I would say the computer-based sort of stereotypical. Well, we don't really have paper and pencil exams anymore, but those sort of stereotypical high-stakes standardized tests. And that it's a performance assessment, and it requires a ton of writing and submitting of artifacts and things like that. Um, um, there are also, though, a lot of more, I would say, in this country, there's been a history of having some more sort of fly-by-night approaches to doing sort of teacher accountability for teacher education programs and folks getting their credentials. Back in the day, like around when NCLB happened, and there's a lot of folks trying to attack teacher education at the time, just as there are now, I think. There was a group, I think they called themselves with ABCTE, and they were trying to do a straight up paper and pencil test to grant, like, do a Scantron to become a teacher, basically. And that was those folks were definitely trying to undermine teacher education programs, trying to paint our programs as as too liberal for them. And we see some of those moves happening now. I was just meeting with some colleagues from the state of Wisconsin, where there's a massive teacher shortage in Wisconsin, and there's basically state legislation that's being proposed there to do something similar, to have anybody with maybe not even with a college degree. Their teacher shortage is so stark there that they're trying to say, you don't even have to have a college degree. You just need to pass this exam, and then you can be placed in front of children in a school, which is, to me, ridiculous. So, a lot of it's a lot of it's super political, and a lot of the movements that we see around sort of traditional certification have to do with not trusting teachers, right? Anytime you create a big exam, it sort of presumes that you don't trust teachers, and more particularly, you don't trust teacher education programs, just to actually, like, be rigorous, to have strong notions of accountability, and I mean that in more equitable terms. And we'll talk about that in probably another question here soon. And it also presumes, and this is one thing that often guides sort of public perception, obviously, and oftentimes I think politicians' perceptions, right? We have a lot of folks, in the general public and in the political aisles who they've been students. They went through 18 years or more of education, or at least they went through 13 to graduate high school, and then whatever they did after that, and they've experienced thousands of hours of education, and they often feel like, oh, I know what that is. It's easy. Everyone can do it, right? And that sort of guides a common sense notion. And then once they go from there, then they're like, okay, then we don't need, that gives them the space to come after teacher education programs and after teachers, and teaching as a profession. So yeah, I'll stop there.
I'm going to add a little bit onto, I like what you're saying about trust there, Wayne, and compared to other institutions. My name is Jenny DeShane. I'm the director of the School of Education at Central Washington University, and also the president-elect of the Washington Association for Colleges of Teacher Education. We'll hear a little bit more about that institution later today. So I've had the opportunity to be in leadership roles in the sciences and then science education, and then in the more general teacher education spaces. And I think one of the biggest things that struck me as I transitioned from, straight sciences to science education to teacher education is how high the accountability expectations are in teacher education compared to other fields. They are by far the highest and most extensive in teacher education and those other areas that I've worked in. And I think I like what you were saying about trust there, Wayne. Like, it is a little bit of a trust thing. Like, we trust that scientists, well, what are those scientists doing? We don't totally understand. We trust that they know what they're doing, and we don't see that quite as much in teacher education. But having worked with hundreds and hundreds of teachers, man, good teachers do know what they're doing, and there should be a lot of trust there. So I just wanted to add a couple of specific things about what we do in our state that I think it's important for people to know. So it's important for everybody to know that all teacher education programs in Washington are required to have a professional educator advisory board. So that's a really highly regulated group of practitioners. You've got lots of working teachers, school administrators, you have staff like school psychologists or counselors that meet with every single program has one of these groups that meet with them several times a year. And we all work really hard to have very high accountability and a partnership, a two-way relationship with these professional educator advisory boards. And even when I'm talking to, people in the business world or business programs, and they're saying, I'm thinking about having an industry advisory board. I was like, oh, we all have that. We take it for granted. Like we have this group that is part of our partnership to really try to do the best we can to work across these systems to support what our communities need out there. I think the other thing that I'll comment on is, so all programs, Erica was talking a lot about all the different standards that we're required to meet. So all programs are required to provide really extensive data to the state on each individual candidate. I think that's one thing that's unique versus a lot of other programs. And we also just worked really closely with the Professional Educator Standards Board to develop a curriculum review process through that all of our programs are going through. And we at Central Washington University had the opportunity to be one of the first institutions to go through this. And I can attest that it was very extensive. It's very extensive. So just some specific examples with this, we wrote over 10 different separate analysis papers on our evidence. I think we provided something, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of evidence and data for this accountability. And this took months with a large team of people. And you asked at the beginning here is, does this work? I think that's a really difficult question to answer because of how complex the system is. You were also talking about how complex the system is. But typically, I think of it working if we are having continuous improvement. We're able to work with our partners, see that data, see where things aren't working, and then start to improve that. So I do think for us, it did work, or it is working. It's more accurately what I'd say, in that we really were able to self-identify even before the review, just going through the review, as well as continue to identify areas that we really need to work on and tackle with these advisory boards and other partners. So I think we're definitely doing a lot of really good things in Washington to support the system as a whole.
Hi, my name is Calvin Roxas, and I'm the Dean of the Woodring College of Education. I'm also a member of the Professional Educator Standards Board. This is, as Erica mentioned earlier, a governor-appointed board for teacher education in the state. I just want to say a couple of things, thanks to Wayne and Jennifer, just hopefully to build off of those things. One is the Professional Educator Advisory Board, the PESB, as mentioned earlier. If I could just kind of go just a little bit more with that. As Jenny mentioned, every college or every teacher preparation program should have their own advisory board. It's made up of different representatives, higher ed, teacher ed, school psychologists, etc. And at our institution, I'm at the Woodring College of Education at Western Washington University. We review one or two of the standards that we're responsible for every year. So every year we go in depth with one of the standards, and then the board, this Professional Educator Advisory Board, we meet quarterly, and we go through our data. They ask us questions, they ask for more information, and then at the next meeting we bring back that information and have continued dialogue. Then they also make recommendations to kind of, did you think about this, or how could you improve this area? And so we're pretty well advised by that board to continue to improve for the good of students in the state. So that's the Professional Educators Advisory Board. Professional Educator Standards Board, again, 12 members appointed by the governor. If you're out in the webinar right now, if you don't know more about that board, please look it up. There's information online, but meet every 2 months for basically 2 days, in which we're looking at policy, we're looking at reviews of programs within the state. And what I want to talk about there is that a majority of the people on that board are practicing teachers who provide perspective on policy or on changes, for example, to clock hours or to whatever certification from their perspective of this works or doesn't work. And of course, there are other people from higher education as well, but I want to point that out, that the board itself, PESB, is made up of a diverse group of people who have the interests of students at heart, but from different perspectives. And I just want to say, and this is, I don't want to talk too long, but when we review things, what we do is sometimes look at programs that are going through an area where they need to improve, and they get support from the professional advice, PESB. But sometimes we have to make recommendations for them to continue to improve, or there might be a recommendation that they need to discontinue that program itself. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is there are ramifications for not following through in terms of meeting standards within a state, right? There are high standards that need to be met, and there are consequences for those programs that do not meet those standards.
I would just also like to add, and kind of bringing it back to candidate accountability, because I see program accountability will be hit on again in question 2. I think one myth that I hear over and over is that Washington State doesn't require standardized passing scores on tests. And so there's no evidence that our candidates are prepared. But I want to spend some time talking about case by case and multiple measures. So although the EdTPA, as Wayne mentioned, our state doesn't require Pearson's standardized pedagogy assessment, EdTPA, programs are still required to have a pedagogy assessment. They just get to use a case-by-case process so that candidates can demonstrate their understanding and ability to teach as in pedagogy in ways that work for the candidates or for the programs or for the districts they're working in. Because as we know, and what we teach our candidates, one method doesn't work for all learners. We have to model that with our candidates. So if we're trying to teach candidates that students are going to learn in a variety of ways and they need multiple assessment methods to be able to demonstrate their understanding and their learning, we as programs have the ability to mirror that to our candidates. So PESB has given us the ability to design our own pedagogy assessments. So many of us are using portfolios. I know, and I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Michelle Jackson. I'm the Director of Education for Lower Columbia. I'm one of our community college teacher prep programs. And I also serve on the PESB board. So we have a case-by-case exception process for those who don't pass, let's say, their NES or their West E, but they still have to demonstrate content knowledge. And it's more rigorous, I would say, than the actual test. Our candidates want to retake and retake because they think, oh, this is going to be easier than me going to all my faculty and getting letters and keeping all these assignments to demonstrate my understanding. We didn't lose rigor. We provided another opportunity for candidates to demonstrate proficiency. And the same is true of pedagogy. So even though we don't have standardized assessment cut scores, where if you didn't score a 220, you're not going to be a teacher, we still have high standards in Washington State. We just give candidates the ability to demonstrate those in different ways. And it looks different program to program, but that's kind of the beauty of education. Candidates get to choose a program that fits them. We're all working with our own diverse communities, and our P boards or PAB boards, they're telling us what they need for the districts that our students are going to work in. And so I think the myth that because we don't require scores on EdTPA and NES or WEST-E, our candidates are less prepared to teach. It's a huge myth because all of our teacher prep programs have developed their own assessment processes to maintain rigor and make sure candidates are ready to go out into districts.
And now to add to what you said is that also lowers barriers for candidates because they don't have to pay 10 times to take a test. They can pay once and then use an alternative method, which is one way that we break down the financial barriers to the profession. So there's a lot of accountability there. Any other thoughts on this question before we move on to the next one? So let me share this slide real quick so we can see the next question. What does it mean for preparation programs? So this is the program itself to be accountable to standards in Washington State, and how has that changed over time? So you have accountability. You have things that you have to do in the state. And we touched on it some, but how has that changed over time? So you as program leaders, you have things you have to do if you want to run a program. And you touched on it a little with the curriculum review, Jenny. So the world has changed. What you're doing now is not what you did 10 years ago.
Can I lead this one off, even though I finished the last one? I was just thinking as Dr. Roxas was talking about our advisory boards, and Jenny mentioned it as well, the data process, and that also was mentioned, our annual data report, one of those is on our advisory board. So how this is a little different than other prof tech programs who have advisory and industry based boards, we actually have to submit a report to PESB outlining every recommendation that our advisory board submitted during a meeting. So like if there's something they want changed in our programs or something they want us to explore or look at, all of that goes into our annual report. And then PESB sends us all the recommendations that we submitted from the year before, and we have to report on how we responded to every recommendation from the advisory board from the year before. So it's kind of this ongoing. So for us, our faculty and our staff, we're continuously reviewing recommendations to make sure when we have that annual report, we have explored every recommendation from the previous year. Because we're going to have to answer to PESB on, okay, your advisory board wanted you to look at, let's say, an ELL endorsement. What have you done with that? You know, what are we gonna report on, you know, the next year? So it's not just having an advisory. We have to listen to their recommendations. We have to report their recommendations. We have to respond to the recommendations, and then we have to report on our response. So it really is accountability within, and I have advisories in other prof tech areas. I tell my faculty in those areas, these are easy compared to what we have to do in teacher prep because of this ongoing cycle of meeting, listening, doing, reporting back. So I just wanted that to be noted because for our program, that's huge accountability.
I have a couple of ideas to jump in on, and I just am grateful to have this opportunity to be learning and talking with colleagues that I talk with quite regularly, yet it feels like such a gift to be able to keep learning in community. My name is Megan Kelly Peterson. I am the director of one of the pathways in our teacher education program at the University of Washington, Seattle. And I am serving this upcoming year. Jenny mentioned it earlier, the Washington Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. I'm serving as the president for the 2025 to 2026 year. And WACD, we love all our acronyms in education, right? WACD is a nonprofit which was started here I am as president, not totally sure when our first year was. So I'm going to figure that one out and get back to y'all on it. Right. But it's a group that has come together to create space for the multitude of teacher education programs across the state to be in community with one another. The reality is that we all might be fighting for the same candidates. We are all working to try to better and support the teacher profession in the state. Yet we are all held accountable to these same standards, the same expectations. And so how could we actually learn together and try to improve our practice together, while recognizing that the specifics we might each be able to bring, the context, the knowledge, because we're working in such different spaces and regions across the state. So I'm kind of holding that piece a little bit in my head as I'm thinking about this question. And I think that the ways that WACD has supported and tried to partner with the Professional Educator Standards Board with PESB in the past, and in the current, I think that is definitely a big shift that has been happening over the last couple of years in particular. I really appreciated, Erica, those slides that you started us with, right? Like recognizing the complexity of all the things that teacher education programs are holding, the range of standards. And I'm pretty sure that list of standards has only gotten longer across the last number of years. I just got a text from our executive director of WACD, Joyce Westgard, who I'm going to shout out right here, who let me know that WACD formed in 1977. So thank you, Joyce, for that. We're going to have to plan a celebration for that as we think about, okay, all right. So I think that that list of standards and what we are held accountable to has been changing over time. And that is something that I think appreciate about Washington State, is that recognizing and holding firm on CCDEI standards, that language isn't changing here in our state, that we are held accountable as a teacher ed program to ensure that we are enacting those standards as a program while simultaneously supporting future teachers who are going out into the field to engage in this thoughtful, deliberative work around understanding who they are, the identities that they are bringing, and understanding the identities and the communities in which they are working. Because when I think about that kind of DNA sequence that you had on that slide, while I might know my content knowledge, if I'm teaching third grade, which is what I used to teach years ago in Seattle Public Schools, if I know that content knowledge and I know some things about how to teach it, and I know some things likely about my community of the kids that I'm working with, if I don't know who I am and the experiences that I've had, the identities that I bring, the biases that I bring to my work, if I don't know that part of the sequence, then that is going to greatly impact the way that I show up and engage kids in the content. And so I think that level and those kinds of standards that are expected here in our state, and we are held accountable to ensure that we are meeting them and supporting candidates to be able to go out into the field and to do that kind of work, is something that I think is really specific here and has been growing. So sometimes we feel like as teacher ed programs, I look at the list of all the things that we're supposed to be covering and it feels overwhelming. So we are trying really hard, I think, inside of a place like WACD to bring that kind of problem of practice to the table for all of us. We're all holding all these standards. How are we ensuring that we are not thinking of them as a list to check off, but to recognize the connections, the intersectionality between them, and the ways that we are across our programs, our courses, our field practicums, working with our partner districts and schools to really think innovatively about supporting candidates to be holding all of that and to see the connections between them. So I think we're trying to think about WACD in a particular place of being able to do that, and do that alongside partnering with PESB to talk together to, Erica, you said it, not just regulate, but also support. So how are we learning in that community space?
Do you all have any thoughts on, because Washington follows its own accreditation processes using all of the standards that you're accountable for. And in other states, things like CAPE and AQUIP, where external entities come in and review programs, and you prepare for that and pay for that experience. Do you have any thoughts on those as alternatives? And I asked this kind of as a leading question. I've worked in 3 states, 2 of them were CAPE states. Um, and I've been through a CAPE review, and we did that review successfully. We had a whole person whose job was just to help coordinate the CAPE review. It was hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars to meet with a bunch of strangers who were not from our state to explain what we did. And after it was over, we had no areas for improvement. And I was really confused because we didn't change anything, but we did respond and perform accordingly for these people in front of us. Um, and so, you know, I know that sometimes people are like, well, they're doing it themselves. They should do this. And I'm like, well, I think I would rather work alongside our programs and build it ourselves and keep the resources inside Washington State's economy than to have you all. So now I'm just testifying here, sorry. Than to have you all take what limited resources we do have, and instead of you directing them towards your candidates, you're you're paying for someone else to give you an evaluation that may or may not be meaningful at all in this state,
Yeah.
because they're not going to know state developed standards.
I I appreciate the wondering about it. And I will say that I only know Washington as a context. I was trained here in Washington, classroom teacher in Washington, trained as a teacher educator here, also and working as a teacher educator. So my context is limited. I do spend, to Wayne's point earlier, like I spend a lot of time trying to partner with what's happening in other states and understand what's happening in other states. But I think that we hold learning to be a key part of our work as teachers and therefore as teacher educators. And I appreciate the way that PESB, I think especially under your leadership, Erica, is really trying to see the evaluation process as an opportunity for learning. It's not going to all happen at once. It's going to happen over time. Each core and cohort of candidates that we get is going to push us to be better, because we need to think about meeting their needs in order to meet the needs of their students. And so I think that a lot of us as teacher educators have served on varied work groups, on varied, I served to help rethink the rubrics for the next level of review, curriculum and instruction review process, right? So that we're looking at the standards. We are thinking then, now how are we going to show evidence of that? And when we show evidence of that, what's the scale in terms of where we are in terms of a score, right? And what does that look like then to have us help inform that process, is that it creates an opportunity for us to learn both how we show the work that we're doing, but also how we make sense of the work that we're doing, and to make improvements and to be learning over time. So I think that for this, holding it here inside of the state allows us to be key parts of that process of determining what counts as evidence. When do we know that that counts as evidence? How are we held accountable ourselves, rather than an outside entity that's telling us and doesn't know the context, right? To be thinking about the work.
I think you called on it, right? But you were still on mute. Yeah, so the couple things. I mean, I think if you had a program that was entirely messed up, and an external thing like, whether it was NCAPE or CAPE or whatever, sometimes those can play good roles in sort of like helping a really, really messed up program sort of find its alignment and go through a whole process. It's super expensive, super resource intensive, right? Like you said, Erica, when you've been connected to CAPE stuff in other states, literally you're taking like probably a full-time faculty or full-time staff member and investing that full salary maybe for a year into like organizing that whole that whole process, let alone all the additional labor that's being done by the other faculty and staff in the unit, trying to pull together the evidence and do all that stuff. So I'm just leading with that because, you know, in all honesty, the only times I've had conversations with folks, and this includes in other states about being, should we get NCAPE certification? Should we get CAPE certified? It's honestly been about marketing. Like they want oh, the other universities around us don't have NCAPE. Let's get CAPE certified, and then we can advertise that and use that as a draw for more students, right? And that's telling to me because I feel like if your main push to do something like that is for marketing, like that, marketing is not about education, right? It's about marketing. And so one of the things I like about what we have here in Washington State is actually we're much better aligned with what we know is good assessment, right? PESB plays this role and serves as a backbone for basically I like even the language around accountability has been hijacked, right? And so I kind of hate using the word accountability this way, like, but we need to be responsible to our students. We need to be, I want the students coming out of our programs to be the best educators possible. And it's the role of PESB to basically work with us and work with all of the various constituents to help us, both develop good standards and then figure out how we're meeting those, right? And we have forms of assessment that I think do that. And I'll also say, right, like think about the whole premise of all of this is you have this external body, like CAPE or something like that, so a corporation or a nonprofit sort of passing as a or really, a money-making operation that's passing as a nonprofit. I mean, like in our program, Bothell, like I have tenured professors and full-time faculty with PhDs who are experts in literacy education, math education, science education, social studies education, and they are creating our courses. They are teaching our courses. Like these are folks who are published and well known around the country. Like these are the folks who are educating our future teachers. And even the assumption that we need an external evaluator like those organizations to come prove, again, it goes back to the distrust thing, right? Like I have these are people who are experts in their fields and they study teacher education and they know how to teach about learning in those specific disciplines in those areas. And this is what we do in our program. And so it's actually disrespectful to them as faculty and to our program in general that we need that kind of external evaluator outside, someone from outside the state and outside of teacher education, really, to examine them when our faculty are amazing and our staff are amazing and so yeah. Anyways, I'll stop there.
I think an important point you make there, Wayne, is that we're not necessarily going to disrespect our way into quality. We're not going to build a better system by undermining a critical piece of it, disparaging it to the point where people don't trust it and think that that's somehow going to lead to a more positive outcome for educators, students, and families. Like if all of the parts are important, then we should treat all of the parts as if they're important by providing support and guidance. And if that means that we design systems in which programs are leading their own continuous improvement with some oversight, because that's how that is, I think we would all have better outcomes, and then people could use assessment to improve as opposed to it being solely a mechanism for compliance and one that produces fear. Because what good quality educational justice comes out of its actors sitting in fear of what might come if they make a mistake? So let's take a look at our next question. Now we've got how are program expectations different in our state compared to other states? Why does it matter? Well, I think we've talked about that some. So we can leave that one there. And let's move on to how are Washington programs working together to improve outcomes for educators, students, and families. So what are you doing that others don't understand and might not be visible?
I wanted to make one comment on the earlier question just really quickly. I don't think
Please.
everybody knows about the since time immemorial.
Yes.
It's John McCoy since time immemorial standards we have in Washington State that is pretty unique to Washington State, and having done a little bit of work with other states, particularly looking at tribal sovereignty, tribal government and history.
Mhm.
I've had quite a few people from other states that you might think, like Oregon, would be very strong in this area, say, wow, what you're doing in Washington is really a leader in that area. So I just want to mention that one, and also thank all the tribal nations that worked very, very hard to develop a lot of that work and continue working to develop that in Washington State. That is pretty unique. I believe
Mhm.
Montana also has something somewhat similar, is what I've been told. Sorry if that's incorrect. I did want to address this question though, because I had a couple of stories to share, and the first one was actually sent to me by one of our Jeremy Delamarter, who's our education development chair from St. Martin's University. He couldn't be with us on the panel today, but he wanted to share how St. Martin's University at the Evergreen State College, Lower Columbia College, and ESD 112 are now working together to create the South Sound Teacher Education Partnership to work on shared issues in that region. And he gave me some examples of some of the stuff they're doing. This is really great. So they are working together with school districts on student teaching placements to make that much more seamless. Anybody on this panel who's in the student teaching placement world knows how complicated it can be with school districts working with multi-institutions. So they're really trying to figure that out there in that region to make it a really value-added experiences for the candidates in the districts. And then they're also really thinking about how each of these institutions can offer different programs, such as different endorsement areas at different institutions, to benefit the different student populations that are more attracted to each of the different institutions. The last thing he said they're working on is training modules for the mentor teachers in the region, so they can be having a lot more consistent and effective student mentoring in that region. So there's 3 specific things that this partnership is already doing to work together in the South Puget Sound region to provide a better experience for their candidates and for their partners in that region. The other short one I wanted to share is from us, actually. So in Central Washington, Central Washington University, Heritage University, Washington State University, Tri-Cities, and Yakima Valley College and ESD 105, which was the Yakima region, have been partnering on a series of trainings, and we've been working on these different information sessions over the last 6 months, and these have been led by the Center for Strengthening the Teaching Profession. And we've really been focusing on trying to better understand the landscape of educator pathways in our region. Where are the gaps? What could we be doing differently? How can we collaborate better to meet the needs in these really rural areas in Central Washington? So that's what we've been working on in our region. I just wanted to share both of these examples because I think people think that like all the higher ed institutions are heavily competing with each other, and we can be, and sometimes we are when you're thinking about different candidates, but that's less so in teacher education in my experience than a lot of areas. So we have both of those examples have public institutions, private institutions, community colleges, and the ESD all working together instead of competing for students, collaborating to think about how can we improve all of our programs and how can we support the families and communities and schools in our region as a whole. So there is a lot of really good, that's just 2 examples of what's going on at the state, and there's a lot going on out there.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll add to that. One component of our WACD meetings, which are also quarterly, I'm not sure, I think that's been mentioned, but we meet quarterly as a whole state group, but There are coffee chat times where topically you can join another group of educators and talk through, whether it be like case by case or since time immemorial, there, are just different topics each quarter, and there are multiple, so you can choose which space you want to join. And I think that's really supportive and kind of authentic because our membership, they will submit what coffee chats they're interested in. So, it's not a couple people deciding where everybody wants to learn or needs to learn. The whole WACD membership has input on what we're doing in those quarterly coffee chats. And so that's a real collaborative approach. And then also the communities of practice, or PLC groups, that PESB organized over the last couple of years brought groups together. And I know the one that I was involved in, there were ESD programs, WEA, community college 4-year, alt routes, just a real diverse group of preparation programs. And in those groups, we would put different artifacts or evidence that would pertain to a standard. Like, this is how my program would demonstrate we're meeting this standard, and others would bring evidence as well. And it really was a good opportunity for us to learn from each other and kind of like Jenny was saying, not compete, collaborate, learn, grow, and really find how we can best prepare students. And sometimes, it's really helpful to learn by what others are doing. We're a relatively new program. I can hardly say that anymore because we're about 7 years new. But I still have so much learning to do. And so when I hear like, oh, this is what we're doing for the social studies requirement, or, whatever it may be, it really is helpful, those communities of practice, or, PLC groups that were kind of bound together. And it was really to inform the rubric process, but it also helped us develop relationships. So now when I have like a CERT officer question, I know the CWU, Danielle, I can reach out to her, and she's always like, hey, if you have any questions, I've been doing this a while. And in our last WACD meeting, she shared the CERT officer's guide. And there were several on the call that had no idea, oh, this is a resource. And so there really is a lot of collaboration, and it's collaboration to inform practice, but also so that we can meet our students' needs. Everybody is interested in the best outcomes for students, not just K-12 students, but our college candidates as well. So I see a ton of collaboration and kind of working together to improve outcomes for candidates and for students and families.
I just want to maybe go back a little bit and to the previous question and thinking about the different standards, and then really get back to what the last two respondents talked about. What would be thinking about, how is our state different, and why is it important for us to have, our accreditation process as it is? I think that context matters. Context matters a great deal. I think that thinking that all things are universal, we can unpack that and see problems with that. And I think that in the state of Washington, what I'm really happy and so thankful for are the CCDEI standards, cultural competency, diversity, equity, inclusion, that was mentioned earlier, and also mentioned earlier since time immemorial standards. Those things we take a look at very seriously within the Woodring College of Education, and how do they integrate into our programs. And that's really an important piece that sets us apart, if you will, from other states. And how would you be able to take a look at that from other states if you're coming outside of the state to try and look at that and assess that? I think that's a problem. I think taking it another way, the support for integrating those standards is really important, and that's something that I've seen in the state really grow under PESB. Michelle just mentioned the ways in which professional learning communities happened over the last year and a half. And it wasn't, I just want to name it as such. These things are not like we're going to get you. We're trying to see what you didn't do and then, give you a bad rating. And then you're going to improve because you got a bad rating. It's meant to be we're professionals and we're improving in terms of certain standards. And how do we, as Michelle mentioned earlier, well, what are you all doing? Oh, that's really helpful. Okay, we could do something like that. And to grow like that is really a healthy sign, I believe, within the state versus, we're holding things close to the vest, right? Through the PESB, through our teacher education programs, working together to improve teacher quality by looking at standards, by looking at program review, and taking those things very seriously. So I just wanted to point that out, that context matters and support. I want to name very clearly, explicitly, the staff of the Professional Educator Standards Board for providing those opportunities and finding funding to do those professional learning communities, which happened over the better part of a year and a half. Thanks.
I will now unmute. My name is Julia Aguirre. I am a professor in the University of Washington, Tacoma School of Education, and also the faculty director for our teacher certification programs, both graduate and undergraduate. And my area of expertise happens to be math education. So I say that because oftentimes people use math scores to make claims about teacher preparation. And I find that, as people have described earlier, highly offensive and incomplete. And so one of the things that I just want to affirm a lot of the things that people have said here around the collaborations that we're doing together. We still need more. The ideas around our participation in various PESB and sort of statewide efforts to strengthen our endorsement competencies. So when we were describing changes over time around our endorsement competencies, some explicit examples of our participation and then supports have been around, let's say, supporting specific endorsements that elevate and very specifically focuses on connecting content knowledge to students' lived experiences and family and cultural community funds of knowledge. That is actually written in the endorsements around math education. And that was written because I participated along with some of my colleagues in that professional learning committee to uplift and revise those standards. And so one of the things that I think is important for us to recognize is that we are constantly looking for ways to build on our strengths and address our growth areas, as that people were describing continuous areas of improvement, as well as lead the nation in some of this work, right? When I point out what is in our endorsements, particularly around equity, diversity, explicit statements, not only that, they're also in the legislative, they're in the code. Like those are things that help us as a state, because education is the right of a state in this particular time and place. We are in a very, very strong position to continue the good work that we do, right? And our teachers are prepared to embrace and build on our students' strengths and the strengths of their families and communities that they have the honor to serve. And so one of the things that I like to talk about is I am blessed with teacher candidates who have extraordinary backgrounds, right? We are in the South Sound, located in the South Sound area. We have students who are active military, as well as leaders in that context, women of color who are leaders in that context, and they see themselves as both and, right? And they can be models for both and. And that is the beauty of the kinds of new generation of teachers that we are educating. We're not educating for this certain generation. We're educating our teachers for their future students and their future students' grandchildren, right? And so we are not just educating now, we're educating for the future. And when we start recognizing what we're doing and building here in the state, it can be models for other places, and that we value the intrinsic intersectionality of all the strengths and interesting experiences that our teachers are going to be coming with, we helped set a pathway and a model for other states to follow. So, and that can't be measured based on syllabi or test scores, right? And so those tend to be the public sort of, or the public sometimes only sees those kinds of um, uh, examples of evidence of teacher preparation program accountability, and those are sorely, sorely misguided and only like very surface level compared to what we actually do. And so I just wanted to affirm everything that people have said, our collaborations, where we could grow. I really do feel like we could do a better job of including more community and family voice in the works that we're doing. And so finding ways in which we can build on that and include that more, particularly because the state is investing in dual language programs and things like that. We need to, in any high need area, we need to continue to support and ask for and honor the families and community voices that we're serving.
I think one of what you said really points to the importance of recognizing the work that you all do as a profession. When medicine wants to change, it's doctors who push that change. When law wants to change, it's lawyers and judges that push that change. And when education wants to change, in so many places, it's regulation from the top down, it's heavy-handed, and it eliminates the voices of the professionals who make the day-to-day decisions. And I feel pretty privileged to work alongside you all and have your expertise bring change that rolls up, not out. So it is you and school districts and classroom educators who point to problems or opportunities for us to adjust and improve. And that is far more valuable and impactful than it is to receive a letter grade um from an institution that knows absolutely nothing about Washington. So those are critical. If we say we respect the profession, then we respect what everyone brings. And there has to be space for that in how we put together policy. Can we co-construct regulatory processes? We can. And guess what? When we do that, they're followed more easily because they're better understood, and that produces better outcomes for you all. Nobody wants to have failing programs. There's no joy in saying that people aren't doing well, especially when they could be if we got out of the way. So there is absolutely a lot there. And I do agree with you, Julia, that we are fortunate in our board to have many voices of practicing educators really guiding what we're doing and really pushing ourselves to get closer to students and families as other critical voices in that endeavor, especially now as the world is changing underneath us. So let's come back and see what our next question is. Okay, so we're on our final question, and this is a how question. How can policymakers, state education leaders, education partners, and stakeholders support or collaborate with teacher preparation programs as they work to improve outcomes for educators, students, and families? So what can we do instead besides um, judging each other or blaming each other, which tends to be how things work in a system. Each part blames the part before, the part after. The fourth grade teacher blames the third grade teacher for not doing a good job of teaching multiplication. Um, it's kind of a natural tendency in any system that has vertical or horizontal alignment. But we don't have to operate that way if we don't want to. So, what kind of collaboration with all these other actors in the system that are our partners, what would that look like? How could we continue to advance this profession in partnership with others? We have many other programs, legislative staff, many people on online listening who are those potential partners. How would you like to work together with them?
Thanks, Erica. I'm so thankful for the support of legislators in the state, for their support of teacher education programs. Just always present, always so interested in how much the lawmakers know about teacher education programs or the schools and all the work that they're doing. I'm going to propose something interesting. I haven't thought it well through yet. But I think many people who are perhaps on the watching know of this idea of Day on the Hill, where we go up and talk from, for example, from teacher education programs perspectives, and go talk to lawmakers about things that we're working on and things that they're working on, and having a dialogue. But I'd love to have this idea of somehow inverting that and having the lawmakers come to teacher education programs or to colleges and working, like spending the day, alongside us in the schools, navigating these systems that we have, so they can see, first hand, up close, what are some challenges and struggles we face as we do the work. I just think that we can continue to build, what I'm getting at is we can continue to build dialogue, informed dialogue about the needs of teacher education programs, because we're, in the trenches, as it were. Maybe that's not the best analogy. We're in the front line. That's not also a good analogy. We're there doing the work, and sometimes it's complicated. It's not just give us money and we can make it happen. Let's talk through what the challenges are, so we can use those funds effectively for the good of the state. So I don't know how to exactly do that, and I know it's an inversion of the usual model, but I think it'd be really helpful because teacher education programs at all levels do such great work, but they need to be listened to in terms of what their struggles are or what we need to do moving forward. Thanks.
All right, I want to go because I have my wish list. Okay, so broadly speaking, I would love to see where we're all committing to trusting our teacher preparation programs, that we're going to be doing substantive investment in that. So invest in higher education means invest in teacher education, that we collaborate with one another, and that we take action. And the things that I am particularly going to use my opportunity here to talk about is that we, as a collective, our programs invest in developing knowledge and skill sets that do the following. We are invested in cultivating positive teacher-student family relationships, right? And that should be affirmed and supported. We also help teachers develop and foster a sense of belonging in learning spaces, right? We emphasize growth mindset. And this is where I need you to think collaboratively with me. So we emphasize growth mindset, which is difficult to do when we work in a system and when teacher candidates and teachers work in a system that is the structural equivalent of a fixed mindset, right? That means that we are in a system that still tracks students, still promotes academic apartheid, still promotes ability grouping, and uses test scores to make high stakes decisions that are often used as deficit labels instead of affirming students. That needs to change because that's a huge structural piece that our teacher preparation programs are trying to create a new generation of teachers that are emphasizing a more culturally responsive inclusive, asset-based approach to teaching, which we all really want for our kids, for our children and grandchildren, and our grandchildren's grandchildren. And so we need that to be helped. So we need like everybody here to work toward dismantling those systems of academic apartheid that are currently impacting our students now and our teacher candidates now. And then we, need to continue to build that strong foundation around high quality, culturally responsive, equitable, inclusive instruction that we have started both in core subjects, arts, and social emotional learning. And that we need our partners to continue to work on that with us. So when we only have like like Eric said, we have like 2 years with them, right? At most. Some of it's just 1 year. And so we need to be able to do that handoff to the district partners and where they land with their first jobs so that that learning can continue and be consistent, right? And the last thing that I'll say that I really is close to my heart is figuring out ways to provide incentivized teacher preparation programs and district partnerships to incentivize mentoring programming, and support both stipends for cooperating teachers, field supervisors, and that handoff to early career, as well as investing in student or in teacher candidates and investing in them financially, right? So they need support, scholarships, they need paid internships, they need things that will allow them to, because many of our students come from working class backgrounds, their financial aid has diminished over time and tuition has been more expensive. So how can we, like collectively, as all of this group on this and stakeholders, policymakers, legislators, how can we provide a financial incentive for students to help them prepare and get through and successfully complete this rigorous preparation that they're going through? And we do well, and we could do better, right? Because many of our students still struggle financially. And so I really want to figure out ways in which we can incentivize and support students with whether that's fellowships, scholarships, financial aid, loan forgiveness, something that then supports them so that they don't finish their education with a huge debt, right? So what can we do to help support that collaboratively? What can the legislators do to promote that? So I'll just stop there, but that's sort of my wish list.
It's like I don't even want to try to speak because I feel like, Julia, your wish list was so exactly like the things that we need to be thinking about and then some, right? And I think that to your points, to Kevin's point, I think that what are the structures we already have that might help us get to achieving some of those things? And I do think that we have the organization that is WACD as a place where we are already coming together. It's gotten brought up, right? 3 times a year for a day and a half or more. And what would that look like for us to think about regionally? What's the ways that we could attend to the wishes, the wish list, the work at a regional level in addition to across our state? How might we rethink the way, to Kevin's point, of partnering with legislators and actually telling our stories there? I had the opportunity to attend WACD's kind of parent organization, which is the American Association for Colleges of Teacher Ed, put on Washington Week early this month. So I attended a day on the Hill going to offices of our senators and representatives. And that was terrifying and also so intriguing and interesting. And to your point, Kevin, like going into their space versus inviting them into ours to be kind of like walking through what's a day in the life of a teacher educator and or a teacher to fully think about the complexity of this work that we're doing. And I think those kinds of experiences will help us, Julia, in making the case for why we need paid internships, why we need these kinds of work. And so how do we better understand and trust each other's work in order to engage in that? And I think that WACD is poised to hopefully be a place where we could do that because we're already meeting together. So how could we be more thoughtful and intentional in our meetings, which I think we've been trying to do over time. We have spaces for the different kinds of groups to meet, like Michelle highlighted, the certification officers, the deans and directors, to be able to talk about the things that are really specific to that context and the work that we need to do. But we've tried to add in keynotes that help us to make connections to communities and families that teachers are serving, or panels, or partnering with the PESB to make sure that updates get shared and all of that kind of work. So I think we could be more. I'm leaving this conversation feeling more inspired to wonder about what that WACD space might be able to continue to grow and be, to think about doing this work in a really collective, collaborative way where learning is at the center of it.
So the original myth we were trying to debunk is that teacher education is failing and therefore not needed. What do you have to like? These are your parting words. We have about 6 minutes left. At the conclusion of this webinar, we'll get the video captioned, edited, sent out. We're going to send a survey to all of those who are listening and registered to find out, like, how would you like to continue? Would you like to be in dialogue? Today was these programs sharing their stories. Do we want to host dialogues that include legislators, district leaders, to really get at some of these persistent problems of practice? But having been a teacher educator, I understand from the inside out, the value of your role, even though your role is just a sliver of what the education system is. And so, what final thoughts do you have on this idea that, you don't need higher ed, you don't need degree attainment for preparation? What are your thoughts on that? After having heard all of each other and had an opportunity to think about what else could collaboration look like?
I can say something really briefly. I mean, there is a lot of research already that, especially coming out of Texas, that we do need higher ed and we do need teacher preparation. And I encourage people to look that up. I don't have citations off the top of my head if you're still thinking like we don't really need teacher preparation. But I think that since this is the end of the panel today, we should focus more on where we should go from here. And I think I didn't say anything earlier because I think Julia and Megan and Kevin and everybody I agreed with what you all were saying. We just invite you to continue to ask any one of the individuals on this panel and many more contacts we have in your regions through WACD to be part of the conversation. Don't start with assumptions. We all make that mistake very easily about everything. We all have biases. So start by trying to put those things aside and asking these experts on this panel and to come and have a conversation, because I think people are really willing and interested in collaborating. And it can be very difficult. We're working across so many systems. Erica, you showed that whole diagram of how many different systems we have to interact with. And I'm also kind of a realist. We all have only so much time in the day. We're all doing our day-to-day work. We're all busy. But I do think people do want to have that conversation and want to collaborate. So please reach out to any of us here to have more conversation. Sorry if I all volunteered you all to.
I think we live in this, I'm just going to name that we live in this time of like so many budget cuts, for example. Not sure other places, but I can name that at university settings or community college settings. We live also in a fraught political time, as we know well. But I'm leaving the conversation here and all of the work through PESB and WACD and talking with our fellow teacher education program providers here, really energized, actually. What I mean by that is, there's so many people working so hard at trying to solve some of these vexing problems and so thoroughly committed. I see one way things going up, actually, right, if you will, because of that work, because of that commitment. So I know the struggles are there. I'm not minimizing them, but I just see such commitment, and that's going to take us a long way forward in this path. We just need to keep working together, and we're doing that, and I'm excited for it. And the leadership of PESB and WACD and all of the above, I feel actually good about it. Let's keep going. Let's work forward. I think that's it. We have a lot of opportunity ahead of us, and I actually will end by just saying I don't think we have another choice, because it's for students and it's for the families that live in these communities that we're talking about here. So we don't have any choice. We just need to keep moving forward together. Thanks.
I often share this quote with the teachers I get to learn with and from, and I have it as an author unknown. It says, teaching is the one profession that creates all other professions. And I think about that is what we're holding. That's the reason we're all so tired. Right, when we're thinking about all the things that we are doing and holding, and how the responsibilities of that role and the responsibilities that we then hold as teacher educators to be supporting the current and future generations of teachers in our state and ultimately our country. And so I am grateful for the opportunity to keep learning about how to do this really hard work and to learn in community and through community.
I would also just like to ask for everyone here is that when things are published in newspapers, or when you have, conversations, because education comes up, right? It's part of family dynamics, decision making, right? Of what happens when you are in those public spaces, and the conversations turns to certain claims, right? About the quality of our teacher education in this state. I would ask people to really offer opportunities to learn more and collaborate, right? Be a part of taking action for the betterment of our state, right? And help us, diversify those voices that are participating, not just one segment, right? The segment may be small but loud, right? What are ways in which we can maybe offer more opportunities for families who are often left out of the conversation, right? Communities that are left out of the conversation, and ways in which we can work together to combat some of the negative ways in which teachers are positioned, the system of education and the public education system needs to be uplifted and supported, right? What we're talking really about here is public education. That's different than independent schools, parochial schools, private schools. And so we need to really understand and help support a more complex and accurate and holistic view of this particular area in our state. And I just am asking the group to be a part of that.
Kind of my closing thought on is educator prep necessary. I think of program evaluations that our candidates get on, completion, or even course evaluations. And we often ask, how could we have prepared you better, or something related to that? And the answer is always, more student teaching, more time in class. When it's a class evaluation, they want more lecture time. What could have made this class more effective? More time in the class. And we only get 2 years, like you were saying. So it's 90 credits. No one would select our program if it were more than, because you could get it quicker and cheaper and all the other things. So we really are tied. But when you ask the candidates, what would have made you better prepared? It was more, not less. Like, no one ever says this program would have been better if I could have done it in a quarter. Like, how do we prepare you and get you ready for what's coming? It's more instruction, more student teaching. Candidates really see the value in what they're getting out of teacher prep programs. And so I think that really speaks to, is this necessary? If you're going to succeed and make it longer than a year in a classroom, absolutely it's necessary. If you're going to make an impact on student learning, absolutely it's necessary. You're not going to learn instructional strategies. You're not, I mean, those things don't just come from, any four-year program or no four-year program at all, but really talk to people who are in classrooms and ask, was your prep program impactful for the work you're doing? And I guarantee you the answer is going to be absolutely. I couldn't have, and they can generally name professors and faculty and mentor teachers who were that person of impact that helped them become the teacher that they are. But I really think when you're talking to candidates, is educator prep necessary? 100%.
I guess for me, I'll just my closing thought is more just lately, amidst all the struggles and the stuff that Kevin named, for instance, or that Julia named, like, I just try and I want everyone in general to sort of remember that, like, if the goal is to have healthy kids, and we're dealing with all this budget stuff, if the goal is to have healthy kids, that inherently means having healthy communities, and that means having healthy schools, and that also includes higher education, right? So it's K-12 and higher education. And so for me, whatever struggles we're having and issues we're dealing with, like that, to me, it needs to be the conversation, because really, it's really all of us or none of us in that regard. And whatever attacks we might be feeling, our communities are feeling as well. And so we just need to understand that we're all in it together that way.
I think it was Dr. Etta Hollins who said that teachers build nations. And at a time where our nation is in a lot of turmoil, it will be teachers and schools and communities that help put things back together, that help reshape the kind of world where everyone gets a high quality public education in an environment that is safe and affirming. And so I thank you for your contribution to that and for being willing to share um, the parts of it that are difficult so that we can overcome those challenges. There's nothing easy about any of these jobs in education. And it never gets easier, but it can get better. It can become more effective, and we might actually enjoy the journey of grappling with these persistent problems and doing that in community, not just amongst teacher educators, but with teacher educators in other parts of the education system. So my hope for this one is for people to hear the beauty and knowledge that you all have to share, but to also be curious and interested and having more in-depth dialogues across the system so that we're all thinking holistically about what we need to do to elevate this profession and preserve public education for all the children and families who happen to live here. So thank you for your time. And we'll be following up after with the survey to ask folks what their interests are in other topics, if they would like to be a part of dialogues, because we did not have the chat open for discussion today because I wanted these folks to just be heard. And now there will be opportunities to be in community and in dialogue as we go forward. So thank you all and have a wonderful week, and please be safe and look out for each other. Thank you.